Hey folks, hope everybody on Zoom can hear me as well. My name is Zoran Tiganj. I'm an assistant professor at Indiana University, Bloomington, and I'm gonna talk. My talk is titled Path Integration Impairments Reveal Early Cognitive Changes in Subjective Cognitive Decline. And in the spirit of CRCNS, this is a very collaborative project. In fact, the title of the talk is also title of our recent paper, and the credits for, let me show that right away. The majority of the work, that the credits go to Vlada and Raiso, who did on one side a lot of behavioral modeling and data acquisition and analysis, and also some hierarchical Bayesian modeling and sort of more in-depth computational modeling. And shout out also goes to Aaron and Thomas, my PIs on the grant. This is one slide from Aaron, who tried to illustrate sort of how this our CRCNS overlap looks like. Thomas is working on human data, participants doing tasks like path integration, often folks with MCI or AD patients. Aaron is working with rodents, also often those with MCI or AD. And on my end, it's more on the theoretical computational modeling, learning memory and navigation in general, but in the context of this project, primarily path integration. So in this project, for us, the objective is on detecting pre-symptomatic Alzheimer's disease-related cognitive changes. And we focus on self-motion-based navigation tasks. More specifically, we look into path integration as sort of a tool that could potentially help us to get to this detecting pre-symptomatic AD-related changes. Path integration, it's the ability to track one's position and orientation by using self-motion cues. And I guess maybe this usually doesn't go that well on the stage, but I'm going to close my eyes and start walking just to illustrate the idea of path integration. Presumably, I can still keep track of the distance and orientation. I can keep track to some degree of distance and orientation to the start location. In the absence of visual input, so I'm sort of integrating my velocity and maintaining the spatial representation. It is a good candidate for this, for detecting pre-symptomatic AD-related cognitive changes. There are a few factors that make it a good candidate. On one side, it's thought to critically depend on grid cell computation in the internal cortex. Internal cortex is believed to be the first neurocortical region to exhibit tau pathology, and then neurodegeneration in the AD, and grid cell dynamic and navigation deficits are also known in AD models in mouse. And behavioral work has suggested that corrupted path integration in MCI, mild cognitive impairment, and early AD. So all those factors sort of lead to our question, do path integration deficits emerge at earlier stages of the disease before traditional cognitive symptoms become apparent? And can we use these path integration tools basically to detect those early onsets? Specifically, we focus on a subject of population who fall under the category of subjective cognitive decline. So these are people who self-identify, elderly people who self-identify in this group of cognitive decline. And we think of this as a potentially the earliest stage of AD. This graph at the bottom is trying to illustrate this normal aging process. Also, how good is the cognition? How good are what we can detect using standard cognitive tests, and how that what we can detect using standard cognitive tests go down a little later than the early onset of the AD. So with this aspect of subjective cognitive decline, we are trying to kind of find this window before the onsets actually take on to be able to pinpoint the early AD as early as possible. You're asking basically two questions. Do participants with self-reported, subjective cognitive decline show path integration deficits? And if so, what are the mechanisms that may represent the earliest degradation of path integration due to this emerging AD pathology? To study this, we have conducted an experiment with 74 control participants, 26 participants with self-reported cognitive decline. So we have these two groups, and we're basically going to look into difference between them in a path integration task. In general, there are no interesting differences between the groups based on a number of other factors and tests. And the path integration task designed by Vlada and Thomas is a little bit modified version of what people usually do very often in path integration. There's this concept of triangle completion. So you walk on a straight path and you turn, then you need to point to the origin. In here, they made a few changes and trying to provide a little bit better account, in particular for angular orientation, and make it maybe a little less easy to participants to exactly try to memorize particular distances. So participants here move on a curvy path. In particular, they're wearing VR goggles that are showing them something looking like this. At first, they get to a start location. They get oriented. They're directed where to orient. And then an object will appear that they're going to be following this little white ball. So they're following the ball. They're going in the VR, following the ball. And then they're shown again the object that was at the start location that they need to point to. They need to use a joystick to indicate in which direction is the start location and how far it is. There were a couple different versions of the task, in particular, a version with two stopping points. So there were 2 points along the trajectory where the participants were asked to stop and point to the start location. What we can then record is basically what is the path integration error, where exactly do they point relative to what is the true start location. In particular, there was also another component here, and that was the angular orientation. So participants were actually at every stopping point asked two questions. One was to point to the start location, and the other one was to indicate their original head orientation. So there was this component of sort of tracking the angular integration, this on the left, and also this standard path integration response. The goal was to try to decouple the two and see if there is some decline that we can detect already on the angular integration response. Now, to the results, behaviorally, there was a difference between the subjective cognitive decline participants and the control group in terms of the path integration error. So the SCD participants had larger PR error, path integration error. This error increased with distance. So the first stopping point, which is closer to the start location, it was lower. At the second stopping point, it was larger. It didn't differ whether the path itself had two stopping points or one. When there are two stopping points, basically participants take longer to come to the end. So there is more time. So there's more opportunity in some sense for noise and different correlates of error to accumulate. But in this case, this time did not seem to be a factor. It was more the distance, the travel distance that was a factor contributing to the path integration error. We looked into a number of different correlates. So in particular here, females exhibited a larger PI error. Path integration increased with age. This latter one is known from the previous literature as well. There were no differences in angular integration. So in this task, when they were pointing to the original head direction, there was no difference between the SCD and the control group. And we looked specifically Vlada looked into a number of other possible correlates that could lead to this, for example, head movement, translational velocity, angular velocity, and so on. These were not distinguishing the two groups. Changes in exploration as a function of time, like changes between the first 10% of the trials and the last 10% were also, there were changes, but they were not different between the two groups. Similar path integration performance in both groups over time, so there was no learning effect over the experiment. And judgment of distance did change with the magnitude. So as the magnitude was larger, so was the error. Basically, it's like a Weber-like effect, but it was also similar for both groups, SCD and controls. And number of these analyses that I just showed and a number of others that I did not include here were done by Vlada, who did an amazing job here. Now, to the next part, which is, we see that, okay, there is a difference between control and SCD in path integration performance. Now let's try to see what are the driving forces for that. So let's try to see if we can characterize path integration error sources. And a number of things, like in maybe velocity estimation has some issues, maybe there is noise and so on. So we try to model that. In general, if everything works perfectly well, the change in the location estimate would be just dependent on the velocity. So if I'm moving and if I'm able to just integrate my velocity, then my estimate should be perfect. But for example, maybe my velocity estimate is not perfect. So maybe I have some factor here that's multiplying my velocity gain bias. Maybe there's some leak, maybe there's some gradual change in that representation that I'm storing, modulated again here by some, we call it memory leak parameter. Maybe there's some contribution from the noise, like additive bias or some accumulating noise. So each of these can be parameterized, giving us this equation actually that was used in Stangl et al. In 2020, that includes different factors that could contribute to path integration error. Now, given a number of behavioral trials, it's a question of how do we estimate these parameters. One approach could be to do a maximum likelihood estimation, and we have the error on every trial from the participants. We can do maximum likelihood estimation. That's reasonable, but in many cases here, it leads to very large magnitudes of these estimated parameters. For example, it might end up that it says, oh, this alpha for the velocity gain is 10. Maybe you are overestimating your velocity by a factor of 10, and then ends up compensating that by huge values of this beta or some other parameters. Basically, depending on how your solver, whichever is finding these parameters work, it can end up with some degenerate solution where it finds unrealistically large or small values for these parameters. So rather than doing maximum likelihood, we turned out to hierarchical Bayesian modeling. In particular, Riso built a Bayesian hierarchical model that did not, in that case, we are not getting a point estimate, so we don't get point estimates for the parameters. It's not like alpha is 3, beta is 5, but it's rather a distribution for each of those. And it allows us to set priors. So for these parameters, for example, for alpha, we said if alpha is 1, that will be sort of natural path integration. So we can put a prior distribution on that. We can also put, beta should be 0 and so on, perfect scenario. So we can put a prior on that because we know that huge values, for example, of alpha would be unrealistic and likely to be observed. So we set some priors on each of those parameters. Each of those prior distributions themselves, they have some parameters which are also drawn from some other distributions. These are our hyperparameter distributions, and then we can fit the model. We show that the results I'll show you later do not really critically depend, in particular, on the choices of these distributions. So when we change these numbers to different values, results remain very similar. The main gist is that it basically constrains the fitting process such that it doesn't lead to degenerate solutions. And in addition to scalar estimates, we actually get distributions. So we are ultimately then testing whether the means of the two populations, the SCD and the controls, differ. Means here mean if I have, say, this beta, it's a parameter that I estimated, there's some mu, that the mean of that distribution, that we want to see whether when we sample that distribution for given this hyperparameter distribution, whether they're going to be different or not. So this is just a little bit different way of then doing statistics in that Bayesian hierarchical modeling world. And when we do that for each of these parameters, we look on one side, kind of we collapse it still to a point estimate on in the plot on the top, but also look at the posterior distributions, in particular the difference between the SCD and control. And what we find here is that this difference was significant only for this parameter beta for the memory leak. For other parameters, there was no difference between the two groups. So if we look a little bit more about the memory leak itself, it's that gradual decay of the homing vector distance and direction to the start during movement. It occurs over space, not time. So we saw that because it was not dependent on one or two stopping locations. It's unlikely caused by working memory deficits. There was no differences on working memory tasks. So this is like a memory leak, but this is not. But the performance on different memory tasks by those two groups are the same. So it's arguing that memory leak is linked to movement and positional changes, not stationary intervals. So just to summarize, selective path integration impairment is observable in self-reported cognitive decline. Despite no differences in standard cognitive scores and so on, there's still difference in the in path integration. Deficits emerge when integration of spatial information is required, so when there is some movement, and the modeling revealed that significantly greater memory leak. Perhaps path integration deficits are then affected by integration of spatial cues rather than basic encoding of orientation. So I'll stop here. I'll thank again, the overwhelming majority of the work was done by Vlada and Raisul. Vlada is a postdoc. Thomas Wolbers's group. She did a fantastic job here. She's on the job market now. So if you like this paper, consider adding some more people to your group or university. Raisul is a PhD student with me, and he's also graduating soon. And also, if you like this work, consider adding more people to your team. Thank you very much.
We have a minute or so for questions.
The effect which you showed seemed to have been dominated by 4 subjects. Have you done some other types of tests to follow up on that, or was it?
Yeah, we were looking. There were we did different types of control to see whether there are some outliers or some particular subset of subjects that were driving the effects. And our conclusion was that while I agree with you that looking at the plot, there are few points over there that seem to drive the effect. It was not, even without those and excluding those and considering them as outliers, you would still see a significant effect, a significant difference in that. Yeah. Yes.
Have you considered following up with these participants to see if they've been clinically diagnosed with cognitive decline?
Yeah. Thank you. That's also a fantastic question. So this is exactly what we are working on now. So these folks are going to come back in the period of, and we're going to track them in a period of about 3 years. So they're going to come back and we're going to see which of the folks with subjective cognitive decline actually developed some further symptoms and whether our methods of prediction were to some degree effective in terms of identifying folks who might actually develop some further or actual symptoms, measurable symptoms of AD.